If this is the first time that you're listening to this podcast, I have to highly suggest that you look up another episode, perhaps something maybe 50 or 60 episodes back, around 30 or 40, or maybe somewhere up towards 400, assuming we get that far, when my HoloCube AI-driven version of myself will make you a personalized version of the episode and tell you all the different ways to think about your life. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. I'm reading from a paper here, which is what I do when I want to make sure that I got everyone's name right. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, who I first met in high school, who could speak Russian and went on to an amazing career at a whole bunch of technical companies, and who is still a very good friend. And William Hearn, who was a supporter from the UK, who had worked with me on a couple vintage project ideas, and then supported the 3-for-1 Kickstarter for my documentaries, and when those fell through, became a supporter of this podcast, where he has remained through all the episodes. Thank you so much to Daniel and William. This is a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. At this point, I have spoken a lot about personal history and used technology to get closer to understanding who I am and what our relationship is to different computers and the world. This episode is basically unedited. This is what I sound like when I'm not trying to talk in my, as my friend Kyle calls it, podcast voice. This is the 100th episode of this podcast, and I'm frankly fascinated to see what happens if I don't have the safety rails of editing. To understand how much work goes into a podcast that is simply a person talking into a microphone, understand that I probably spend about 40 or 50 minutes recording the raw information for a podcast, and then after taking it back to my apartment, I end up spending anywhere between 2 and 5 hours editing it down into the 12 or 13 or maybe 20 minutes that an average podcast episode is. There's an enormous amount of work. What gets cut out? Mostly me screwing up words, odd breathing, mouth clicks, because sometimes when I'm trying to work around some syllables, I just screw them up. Another common problem is being worried about how accurate I am about different technology. And since I don't want to break the flow of the podcast, if I don't know if a piece of software was released in a certain year, but I know it was in a range of years, I will say them all, one after another. Karateka was released in 1982, 1983. Karateka was released in 1984. Karateka was released in the early 1980s. And then later I'll just edit it, put it together, and make myself sound like I really have all this information at my fingertips. I've been editing a very long time. The BBS documentary required me to learn how to work with individual syllables, breaths, bringing back in words. There were cases I would take a syllable from one part of a different interview and use it in a later interview when I was putting together somebody's appearance. I could cut away and cut back in a way that hid all of these other problems, everything from functional tape breaks all the way through to something happening in the background that would have been distracting. Or maybe putting somebody's sentences out of order because they themselves didn't put it in. Editing, to me, is the difference between just speaking into the microphone like now and having something that people will want to listen to. I don't often like to hear what I'm doing when I'm doing raw footage, but I've learned to for this podcast. I have had to listen to myself stumble around an idea, work its way over, and maybe eventually, if I'm lucky, have some sort of insight. These podcasts are recorded using a Yeti microphone, which is one of the standards that are really popular with home recorders. It is a USB microphone that people would have committed murder to have in the 1970s and 1980s. It's pretty good quality. and it goes right into a computer that is recording things at a very good bit rate. And so it produces signal that when I use it for conference calls or for interviews, it always makes the other people very happy to hear because they're so used to terrible office recording. I'm now at 100 episodes of the Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It podcast. When I started on this process, I was just concerned about the crushing debt that was turning my life into one where so much was going right, and I had a wonderful job, and things were good on the pure personal front. But my finances and all of the stuff involved with that was a dull hum in the background that was making me sadder and sadder. So I set off on this podcast simply because I wanted to come up with some way to raise money. The easiest thing to do would be to tell stories. When I had been really running the conference circuit, when I was doing up to 15 appearances a year in all sorts of places, I was always known for doing these really fun out there stories. And I thought, well, that's probably the thing people will want to hear the most. I ended up putting together the first maybe first 5 or 6 pretty carefully, making sure that the script was there and all of the different points would be hit. But I quickly ran out of that. Almost every podcast episode that you've heard since the first few have been completely extemporaneous, completely improv. Me just starting at the beginning and going through to the end. Sometimes I myself don't know what's going to be there at the end. One of my secrets is long pauses. I will stop talking for a minute or two and consider where the next chapter is, and then take out the pause, so I sound like I just moved over to the next thing. I also am talking about things that are about myself, that are things that I understand very well because they've knocked around in my head for years sometimes, and being able to get them out, well, I've already practiced them in my head forever. But an interesting thing happened somewhere around, I don't know, 15th or 20th episode. These podcast episodes stopped being me gifting people with little nuggets of trivia and stuff that I had been involved in. They sort of became therapy. They sort of became me talking through things that had affected me and understanding, maybe once and for all, my relationship to them, my relationship to my family, my relationship to these computers, to understand why I went into certain projects, why I love what I do, why I've done textfiles.com, BBS Documentary, archive.org, all my life in different ways, but still thematically touching on the same motivations. It's really been amazing to me to walk through parts of my life that I thought the door was shut on, and realizing there was a little more in there that I didn't think through. I rejected therapy around the time of my parents' divorce. My father and my mother both insisted I go. There was one who would just ask me questions or play games because I was, 8 or 9. The other one had me draw out things. I guess they were waiting for me to draw incredibly terrible or scary things, but even by that point, I was a literalist drawing person. I was making things look like things. I wasn't drawing huge abstract shapes and saying, this is my life, this is my love. I hope, and I want to think, that the result of the doctors was that they thought I was pretty good adjusted to the family divorce, but maybe they had some other report, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been in anything like therapy. As soon as I had any agency to get out of there, by the time I was 10 or 11, I no longer went, and I have not returned to one since. I'm not fond of paying somebody to listen to me. I'm certainly not fond of someone paying to listen to me to help fix a problem. Long ago, I drove down the idea of having to fix myself like I was broken. I am who I am. I would live my life, and maybe after a while I would realize something needed a little tuning up, and I think I would move the needle in the positive direction and then keep going. That's a little different than finding yourself speaking about yourself over 100 times, covering every portion of your life, trying to find similar events to put together into one episode, and then editing that episode to clearly state what you didn't have a full grasp on, and then finding out what's at the end, being something completely different than you had expected. It's a fact that I love this benefit of the podcast more than the income it's generated, more than it's made people laugh, more than it's enabled me to sharpen some of my skills in terms of talking and speaking with folks and being able to do presentations without having to travel. It has changed my relationship to my life. Being able to post heart attack, be able to come back to podcasts that talk about what that felt to me 6 months, a year, 2 years later, being able to understand how I felt about my own life, my own beginnings, my own end, my own family. That was priceless. I could not have asked for a better gift. The fact that people were listening to these details and then having thoughts on it, that was another thing I didn't expect. I would talk about where I would shop, and then later somebody would, direct message me on Twitter saying, I'm looking for this disc or that disc, and hey, hope you enjoyed Fishco Farms. And I'd be like, how do you know about? Oh yeah, that's right, I talked about it. That happened a lot. My video gaming and all the different video games that matter to me, people know about those. The names of figures in my life, where I've dropped those. And of course, my timeline of history. People know what I was doing in my teens and 20s and 30s and 40s because we've bounced around to all those places. I'm one of the people who definitely doesn't like the sound of my own voice. I'm not very happy with it. I don't like to listen to it. One of the memories I have in elementary school, Gayhead Elementary in Hopewell Junction, was that my parents put me in speech therapy almost immediately. I think it was first grade, second grade, and it involved a number of problems with pronunciation that I was having, and I still have them, enough that people do occasionally mention it. Now, I've tried to bend it after 50 years into a sort of charm so that it's a mark, kind of a unique font, something you would find on a piece of paper to remember what's being written and give it some kind of humanity feeling, some personalization that people could notice and go, oh, that's Jason Scott. He sounds like Jason Scott. It's not as charming, I think, but for some people, they think it's something they like to hear. And I remember having to sit there with a pencil and blow on it and say different consonants over and over again while I held things to a cheek or under a palate. Never liked that. In college, I had to take a public speaking course in my first semester, and I was, nervous as anybody else, getting up in front of 5 or 6 people and presenting some sort of preformed report on nothing. I think I researched, if I recall, how much it cost to go from one place to another using every known transport mechanism, from rented car to rented helicopter to train and so on. And I had to present my thoughts while pointing to a graph, basic stuff. But from there, I discovered something very interesting, which was that I did not have stage fright. I was completely, utterly unbothered by walking out in front of dozens or hundreds, or in a few cases, thousands of people. That wasn't the problem. I may focus a little bit on the quality of the presentation, but I wasn't bothered by it. Combining that with an extremely introverted thing like archiving, like I was doing with textfiles.com, curating text files from all these bulletin board systems. The fact that I was able to get up on stage in my 20s and give talks about this nerdy subject and try to make it entertaining this was, a really nice kismet that people found it entertaining, and I could talk about this minor subject or this weird subject and have it all stick together, often without any sort of graphs or illustrations having to be up. I could just go for about 40 minutes. Now, like anybody who speaks like I do, who's able to just kind of pile words one on another, they either have people who think this is great, they want to hear it all day, or people who find the voice annoying and just want the summary to take home. I get it. I totally get it. I am not for everyone, like I said. I tend to repeat myself. If I'm not super careful, I will tell people the same stories over and over again because some of them are hilarious. But I also realize that wears people down. Not everyone wants that. And I think finding your audience has been one of the other gifts of this podcast. That I have about 1,000 and change of people who load this thing into their machines, play it, listen to it, derive some value from it, and if they don't like it, they listen to the next one. And they generally enjoy the subjects, and they generally listen, and some of them even respond. Traction on this in terms of people commenting, very small. I think that out of 1,000 people, maybe 1 or 2 will respond, unless I do something to irk engagement, which I don't like to play that game. I just recently had a couple of my channels, my live stream channels, get validated, and I was really shocked at some of the metrics they demanded, like how many people on average you needed to have to be considered a real channel, and how many people had subscribed to you and watched you, and how many hours you were up, and what the average viewing time of each individual person was. Like it had to be like 7 minutes or something. It suddenly dawned on me that's why so many channels take 15 minutes to give you 2 minutes worth of information. You include a picture of somebody taking apart a box or unpacking something or showing you what it is. It's because they are leading you on to make you stay longer so that they hit this random metric, and I just could not do that. I have very strong beliefs. I believe that you should bounce in, be as intense as possible, and then bounce out. I'm not a fan of making content just to make content. I don't think you should have 1,000 bland, uninteresting items shoved into some sort of box of a very set length so that you can sell it. As a result, some of the podcasts have been as short as 11 minutes, and some have been long as about 30, depending on the subject, depending on where I'm going. I let the words say it. So what else? Well, in terms of my finances, I am in so much better shape when I started this. When I first started it, I was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Now I'm not. I have a tax burden that comes from the income, and I still think about that, but arrangements have been made. It's nothing at all scary. Just this morning, I got mail from my cardiac rehab place, and they have told me I owe them $800, and I was very confused because last time was free, and I realized I had blown out the deductible with the actual heart operation, and so moving on to the cardiac rehab was, free because I had blown it all out on the operation. But since I was going to cardiac rehab the next year after getting operated on the 23rd, and it's a $700, $800 bill, about $756 actually. These are the things that kind of drop into your lap, but I'm not scared of it. It doesn't change anything. I'll be able to pay it off pretty quickly. And I thank this podcast for doing that, for giving me that boost, that ability. I'm at 20 minutes now. Now, if I had been editing, I might have been as long as 30 or 35 minutes to get to this point, probably longer, maybe even as much as 40 minutes to get here. But I'm speaking right off the top of my head. I have absolutely no script. So I don't want to drag this on because this may be a weird way to hear me. But the reason I did this was because for one moment, after 100 episodes, I wanted to lift up the hood I wanted you to know what goes on behind it, that even the most simple podcast is a lot of work. And frankly, the most simple of projects are, in fact, hard work and represent somebody's labor trying to do the right thing. And depending on how much of a perfectionist they are, depending on how much they want to get it right, there is going to be a lot of work left on the table that you're not going to see. It has been an absolute pleasure to record 100 episodes. Currently, at this time, I am thinking of doing about another 100. So 200 episodes is my current plan. I know some people want me to do more. I know some people are like, really? Are you going to squeeze out 100 more episodes? But it's a good round number. And if I was to decide that this wasn't working out or that I wasn't producing content that I liked, I would stop. I would not try to squeeze things out beyond where they could go. Sometime in the future, if I really love doing podcasts and I don't want to see it go, I will come up with a new format. I'll have a collaborator. I'll put things together a different way. Maybe I would start that on the side and move over to it. Depends on how much of my time I want to spend on this. But at the moment, I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. I live a good life. I will be 50 years old in just a few months at a very special time. And I had plans. I had plans for my 50th birthday, and I don't think they're going to happen. My original plan was to rent a tank, and that was my big plan. And the place that I rent the tank from is still in business, but I'm getting a lot of pushback from people saying, do you really want to spend your day on a tank? Part of me does, but I don't know. Maybe I'll just do what I did on my 40th. On my 40th birthday, I was on a 1-month-long tour for my movie Get Lamp in 2010. And I flew into Las Vegas one night, rented a room, put up conferencing software, put out the number for the conferencing software, ordered an enormous, unbelievably huge dinner, and sat behind that table and greeted everybody who came in and thanked them as they wished me a happy birthday, until I finally aimed the camera at the bed and went to sleep. The birthday boy completely pooped out. That wasn't such a bad way to spend it. Life's a little different now. We'll see where it goes. But getting this far has been such an adventure. Recording these many podcasts has been an adventure. And I want to thank you all of you, the people who've supported me directly, who have been named at the beginning and the ends of these episodes, and of course the hundreds of others who have been involved to make this exactly what it is. All right. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Forrest Fuqua, who is a hacker who joined Archive Team and invited me up to Rochester to talk to him and his folks at a big security B-Sides conference, and who has the weirdest hat I'd ever seen. It was a bulletin board system in a hat. Mark Pilgrim, who I became ever intertwined with when his life and mine collided a long time ago, and we've become great friends ever since. James Bekoyanu, a lovely guy out in California who has done so much work for me with emulation and also works in VR, has been a great friend of the Internet Archive and supports me. Scott Roseanne, who was my third roommate in college. He was during my sophomore and junior year, I believe. He was a great guy. We had dinner just before one of my heart procedures, and I guess he felt he should support me in this way. He doesn't have to, but I love him anyway. Scott McGrady, who I would have pronounced Scott McReady if he had not written to me to give me pronunciation. So if you ever back me up and decide to go for the $25 an episode or $50 or $100 episode numbers, please be very clear in how to pronounce your name. Scott McGrady. And Joshua Stein, who just popped up out of nowhere. I don't know enough about you, buddy, but I'm sure I'll get to know you going further. And thanks to my hundreds of supporters who have been following me and helping me stay out of debt.